If you think Westerns are just cowboys and shootouts, you're missing a whole other side. Today we're diving into 10 Westerns so violent and extreme that theaters yanked them, censors chopped them to pieces, or they got outright banned around the world. I'm talking movies with graphic violence, brutal revenge, sadism, stuff so harsh people weren't even supposed to watch them. You'll see exactly why. Easily one of the weirdest, bloodiest Italian Westerns ever made. People actually call it an acid Western because it's so surreal and twisted. You've got scenes like a guy getting scalped up close, another guy literally ripped open by townspeople trying to dig gold bullets out of him. It's graphic, it's nasty, and 1967 audiences absolutely freaked out. When it opened in Italy, audiences went nuts complaining about how disgusting and violent it was. Authorities pulled it out of theaters after just 1 week. They made the director cut more than 20 minutes out. Pretty much all the worst gore. International prints were even more chopped up, missing whole chunks of violence. Around 30 minutes were totally lost. And some of those scenes didn't resurface for decades, never even got dubbed into English because they were considered too disturbing. The UK pretty much banned Django Kill outright. It ended up on forbidden film lists for years. Alex Cox, the director, once said it was the creepiest film he'd ever seen, and it wasn't widely available until recent years. Only now has it become a true cult classic, but back then, it was way too shocking for people to handle. Cutthroats 9 is probably the bloodiest Western anyone's ever filmed. Spanish-American production about a chain gang of prisoners being marched through snowy mountains after their wagon gets ambushed. Sounds simple enough, but then it just goes straight into nightmare territory. Characters get burned alive, dismembered, even have their faces smashed with rocks. It feels more like a horror movie than a Western. Censors in the 70s couldn't handle it. Germany banned it for 3 decades straight. From around 1991 until as late as 2022, owning or showing the full uncut version was completely illegal. German officials labeled it harmful to youth, confiscating copies if they found them. The UK was just as strict. When it finally got released there in 1975, British censors forced heavy cuts before they'd even allow an X rating. Some countries like Norway and Sweden refused to screen it at all. It was totally blacklisted. Fans only found it through bootlegs or shady VHS tapes, and eventually it built a cult following. This one is a British-American production starring Oliver Reed, Candice Bergen, and Gene Hackman. Reed plays an outlaw who kidnaps Bergen's character, Hackman's wife, and then things get nasty. For a mainstream Western, it pushes violence to shocking extremes. Long scenes of sexual assault and graphic killings. A guy gets shot right through the eye. Another character has his throat cut open. Even an animal slaughtered right there on camera. Obviously, censors went nuts. In the UK, the British Board of Film Censors demanded about 9 minutes cut from the original print before they'd give it an X rating. They removed animal violence, most of the sexual assault scenes, and toned down the bloodiest moments. But even after all those cuts, the film was still too much for most audiences. Many theaters wouldn't touch it, effectively blacklisting it in conservative areas. Home video in Britain didn't fare much better. Well into the 80s, releases still had cuts. It wasn't until 2015 that censors finally allowed the human violence back in, but scenes of animal cruelty are still banned. In the US, the movie barely got by with an R, but it still got shut out of many theaters entirely. Over the years, it faded into obscurity, never really getting re-evaluated by critics. But in cult circles, it's known as one of those vicious, ugly Westerns, so controversial it practically disappeared off screens entirely. El Topo is one of those movies that's almost impossible to describe, but easy to understand why it got banned. Alejandro Jodorowsky directed this surreal Western, and he starred in it himself as a gunslinger on some kind of spiritual and violent journey. It's packed full of images that shocked everyone. Tons of violence, weird religious symbolism, explicit scenes, even animal cruelty. Supposedly, hundreds of rabbits were killed just to film one scene. And the real kicker, Jodorowsky himself claimed later that one of the sexual assault scenes was actually real. He walked that back eventually, said it was just him being provocative, but the damage was done. Mexico basically refused to show it at all. Jodorowsky's earlier movie had already started riots and gotten banned, so they weren't messing with this guy again. So, instead of opening in Mexico City, El Topo premiered in a tiny theater in New York, in a midnight slot. And that's the way it stayed for years, blocked from wider distribution because nobody wanted the controversy. Later, rights disputes kept it out of circulation completely for over 30 years, which only made its cult status even bigger. It became legendary, championed by John Lennon and Yoko Ono, credited with basically inventing the midnight movie craze. It finally got a proper home video release in 2007. Known at the time as the most savage film in history, Soldier Blue was banned because it showed something nobody wanted to see. It's based on the real-life Sand Creek Massacre, where U.S. cavalry troops slaughtered a Cheyenne village back in 1864. This Western doesn't hold back at all. There are graphic scenes of women and children being murdered, people getting mutilated and scalped, bodies everywhere. The whole issue was political. It showed American soldiers committing atrocities at a time when Vietnam was still fresh in people's minds. In America, Soldier Blue barely scraped by with an R rating. The censors wanted an X, but they narrowly avoided that. Still, people didn't show up. Seeing U.S. soldiers portrayed as brutal killers was just too much back then. In the UK, they gave it an X rating, and it did pretty well. But years later, when it finally aired on British TV in 1980, they cut the entire climax, just removed it completely, said it was too horrific for viewers at home. The Great Silence is another Western that ended up banned for its violence, but also for its insanely bleak ending. You've got a mute gunslinger trying to protect people from bounty hunters. But what made the censors really lose it was the ending. The bad guys win. Completely. They kill the heroes, massacre innocent villagers, just about as bleak and hopeless as you could get. UK censors immediately banned it when it came out. Finland banned it too for excessive violence and didn't allow it until 2 decades later, and even then it had serious cuts. In America, 20th Century Fox owned the distribution rights and just straight up refused to release it theatrically. They said the ending was too dark, the violence too much, and that it'd never sell tickets. But today, it's been rediscovered. Uncut versions are easily available now, and even Tarantino considers it one of the greatest westerns ever made, precisely because it went places no one else dared go at the time. The Wild Bunch was one of the first movies to really push screen violence way past what audiences were used to. It's about aging outlaws around 1913, and there are 2 huge massacre sequences, beginning and end, done in slow motion, with blood exploding everywhere, bullets ripping people apart. The camera doesn't look away from anything. Men, women, even kids get shot down. In America, they barely avoided getting an X rating by cutting around 10 minutes. But even that trimmed-down version was shocking for 1969. Several countries banned it outright. Australia wouldn't even consider it at first, and some European countries refused to release it. Mexico, where the bloodiest scenes happen, allowed it but with the violence toned down. Authorities there were concerned about the political implications too, but eventually, the Wild Bunch got unbanned pretty much everywhere. By the 90s, uncut versions were out, and critics recognized it for what it was, a landmark Western that changed movies forever. It even got preserved in the National Film Registry. Sergio Corbucci's Django pretty much changed spaghetti westerns forever, mostly because people couldn't handle how violent it was. Franco Nero stars as a mysterious gunslinger who literally drags around a coffin. Nobody knows what's in it at first, but you find out pretty quickly, and it's brutal. For the mid-60s, Django was way over the line. You had these graphic scenes like a guy getting his ear sliced off and stuffed right in his mouth, huge shootouts with machine guns mowing down crowds, non-stop violence. Stuff like that was just unheard of then. So, naturally, censors lost their minds. The UK banned Django right away. The British Film Board wouldn't even give it a rating. Didn't officially show there until 1993, more than 25 years later. Italy tried censoring it too, told Corbucci to cut the ear scene, but somehow he forgot and left it in anyway. That made things even worse. People freaked out, theaters refused to screen it. In the US, distributors barely even touched it. Django got stuck playing these tiny grindhouse theaters, totally underground. But all that controversy, all that blacklisting, just made people want to see it more. Knockoffs started popping up everywhere, fake Django movies spread all over Europe. And decades later, the real Django is finally considered a classic, a key influence on directors like Quentin Tarantino. A Man Called Horse stars Richard Harris as an English aristocrat who gets captured by the Sioux tribe, and it got blacklisted for basically two reasons: the violence and the way Native Americans were shown. The scene everybody talks about is a crazy initiation ritual where Harris has eagle claws shoved right through his chest muscles, and then he's hung up in the air. It's seriously intense. Even Quentin Tarantino said it totally blew his mind. Almost looks like something out of Hellraiser or another horror movie. But the bigger problem was how the movie handled the Sioux tribe. They basically invented a bunch of rituals and ceremonies that never actually existed. When the movie opened in Minneapolis, protesters blocked people from even getting into the theater, called it humiliating, degrading. There was even a bomb threat at one point, so firefighters had to check the building. But controversy sells. People got curious. The movie made about $6 million, which was huge in 1970, enough to spawn 2 sequels. Bone Tomahawk is basically half Western, half cannibal horror movie, and it's easily one of the most violent Westerns ever made. There's stuff in here that's honestly hard to sit through. Even if you've seen tons of horror movies, some scenes will just stick with you no matter how much you try to forget them. The story itself is actually really good. A group of guys heads out looking for 2 people from their town who've gone missing. Great characters, really tense build-up. But when it gets violent, it gets really violent. There's one specific scene everybody talks about that's just genuinely sickening. People actually walked out of screenings. That's why it ended up getting buried and ignored at first. It's just so brutal that people didn't know what to do with it. Hard movie to recommend, even though it's really well made. But now it's found its crowd, and it's exactly that controversy, exactly that level of violence that made it the kind of movie some people just have to watch.